Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel, and in this video we are continuing with the Forgeworld Warhound Titan build, and specifically we're going to be moving on to the torso, where we're going to put this together in its almost quite in entirety. There's going to be several sections here that I'm going to recommend that you leave apart in order to facilitate the paint job that you want to do on the model. One of the big key things about sub-assemblies that you're doing with Forgeworld Titans, or with pretty much any sort of largish kit really that you're going to build in multiple sections, is to always consider that paint job as you put things together, and can you actually get the paintbrush into the detail to where you need to be able to paint it. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So here we go then guys, this is all of the equipment that I've got that I need in order to make the torso for the Warhound Titan. For those of you that are unfamiliar with JB Weld, this is the stuff that is the best two-part epoxy resin weld solution that you can use to put together any Forgeworld Titans. I actually use these cotton buds in order to apply it, a little bit more controlled than trying to spatula it on with anything else. I'm also going to be using a bit of brass rod just for that added strength really, and I'm going to be cutting that with these little clippers here. It's 3mm brass rod, and the only reason I'm doing that is because some of these sections are very load bearing, they're pretty heavy and quite chunky, so that's the reason why I'm just going to reinforce with a bit of brass rod. Now this is, going to try and test fit to make sure I know exactly what's going on again, just as a reminder. And also going to just calculate and show you exactly where I'm going to be pinning. So from that left engine housing, I'm going to be pinning it into that central piece with all of the engine computer gubbins on it. And then I'm going to be doing the same all the way across. I'm actually going to use 2 pins rather than a single pin, just because my drill bit isn't long enough to actually go all the way through. Just makes it a little bit easier. And the pins I'm going to be cutting are about 1 inch long each. Now I also want to pin the front section to that rear section as well, so I'm just going to calculate here exactly where that's going to go, and there's a handy little bit of hose detailing just inside that front section which will receive the drill piece and just sort of disguise where you're going to put this without having to be really finicky about where that drill bit's going to go. You can see there's 2 large hoses which happen to be less than 3mm, so if you're very careful with the application, you can drill into those, or you can drill into where those little storage boxes are. So you can see there, just under 3mm, and that will work nicely. So that's what I'm going to be doing, just going to show you exactly where all the pins are. So there's going to be 2 pins on there, and then 2 on those rear sections. Now just as a reminder, this is the weapon arms, so they go on to there. You can see that they are keyed, so they can only go one way around. You can't put them on the other side, otherwise it just won't go together. But it's always nice just to kind of highlight the fact that, certain things only go one way round. Now there's a little elevator section. This is how the crew get into the Titan. I am going to just glue that in, but I'm going to leave that out for now because it's going to help with the painting. Where I'm putting this torso together, it's going to be quite difficult as it is, but I wanted to put it together first so I could fill all the gaps and everything to make sure that it all goes together nicely. If you do it all in pieces and then you end up with that gap or separation, then you've got to go through and do a lot of touch-up work afterwards. Now either side of that elevator are these 2 chain winches, and they kind of just fit into that corner there. It's a little bit needs a little bit of shaving off on that piece. It's a bit fiddly to get into, but we'll get to that when we put these bits together. So that's those are the components that go in there, but as I said, I'm not going to be putting those on during the assembly stage, just to aid with painting, being able to get in through that hatch and so on with the paintbrush. Now there's a couple other sections that can go onto this. I'm just going to use regular super glue for some of these sections, so the little exhaust systems on the back, and then these large exhaust systems on the back of the engines as well. Now they are keyed as well, they're chamfered or angled, however you want to put it. So putting that one on, for example, you can clearly see isn't right because the sides aren't parallel with that exhaust port. So you need to make sure that when you put it together that you've got the right one, left for left and right for right, and then you're all good to go. And as you can see, just a 100% check to make sure I haven't got 2 of the same piece. That one goes on that side. So happy days that we've got everything we need ready to go. Now, as I mentioned, not everything gets the JB Weld treatment. Some of it does get regular super glue, and I do favour the Gorilla Gel Glue. That is my my preferred method. Now, there's an option here to either hand drill if you've got a pin vise with a 3mm drill bit. However, I do have a preference just because of the power required here, and to save your wrists, I have a mains powered Dremel, which I've preloaded with a 3mm drill bit. And just to check, you know, that's 3mm because it matches the size of the brass rod. Now be warned, that does make a huge mess. You will get loads of resin, dust and everything else going all over the place. So do it in a well ventilated area, and always wear a breathing mask just to stop all that crap going into your lungs. So as you can see then, I've gone ahead and drilled exactly in those places where I said I was going to drill. So there's one there, and there's ones on either side there to receive the pins. Now, a little trick here is if you're not 100% convinced that you're lining up exactly where each pin goes, make one a little bit bigger than the other. Then you'll make sure that it will definitely receive, and you can pack out any over drilling. So you can see that that's a little bit loose in there, but you pack that out with the JB Weld, or even with a bit of green stuff, to be honest. But it gives you that little bit of wiggle room to make sure that it does go together. If you do it a perfect 3mm hole and you're off by just 1mm, then it becomes very, very difficult to put together. So I always tend to leave a little bit of wiggle room on one side at least, because when you pack that out with your adhesive, then it becomes set in the right place, so there's no problems. So just showing you exactly where the pins go and how this all goes together. It's very tricky with hands like this, but you can see just a little bit of wiggle room, and we're all together. So once I've got that straight in my hands, you know, you can see that there are some natural gaps that have appeared, and those gaps will fill with green stuff. So if you've never built Forgeworld before, don't be afraid of the fact that you will get gaps. It's just a natural part of the process. So filling that with some green stuff will make that all go away, so you won't see any problems. Now, before I'm going to do any adhesive, what I'm going to do is score every single receiving surface, because you notice that that's very smooth. And that's no good for any kind of adhesive. You need some kind of rough side to help with that adhesive. You know, it will seep into the little crevices that you score in and just help with that bonding. So I'm just going to take a scalpel here and just going to carve in several little lines just to help with this. You can also use some very rough sandpaper as well, but this is my preferred method, is just to really give it a good scoring, and that will key the surface to receive the adhesive. I've got a little sand block here, so a little nail file. You can do that as well, just to rough up the surfaces that you're going to be using that adhesive on. So what I'll do is I'll just go away and I'll key all of these areas, because you don't need to see me doing this over and over again. But you just get the idea that every surface that you want to have adhesive on, that it is well scored, and that will help with that final bond. And you can feel it's quite rough to the touch. So I'm just going to go ahead and do all the other sections, and then when we come back, we'll be ready to start putting this together. So there you go, just going to show you now that I've keyed all of those areas. You can just see that on the camera, including that semicircle bit there. And then equally on the receiving side of that, then this side here has been done, this side here has been done, so that all goes together like that. And then these pieces here, so we've got that one there, and they're all been keyed, ready to go. And then finally, that one's been keyed as well. Remember, you've got to make sure that you line up the pieces as a dry fit before you do that, because you want to make sure that only the area you're going to be applying adhesive to, and not any of the detail that's going to be exposed to the paintwork, has that keying. So with all the prep work done, we are pretty much ready to crack on with the JB Weld. So I've got the plastic tray that actually the packaging from JB Weld itself. I'm just going to use that as the mixing trough in order to apply this. But if you've got any kind of little disposable palette, I used to use the bottom of a plastic Coke bottle, I think it was, as well at one point. But anything that's that you don't mind throwing away. Now, a couple of other handy bits of advice here is zip ties and elastic bands are your friend. That means that you can allow the stuff to set, your adhesive to set, whether you're using JB Weld or any other two-part epoxy resin, that enables you to leave that to set hands-free. So if your zip ties aren't big enough, your cable ties, zip ties, whatever you want to call them, aren't big enough, you might need to combine 2 of them together. But if you've got some larger ones, then it will go round in one piece. But I'm just going to sort of pre-measure just to make sure that mine are either big or not big enough. And as it happens, I need 2 cable tied together. So you can combine zip ties as many times as you like. So I'm just doing that because it was easy to do, and I couldn't reach to the camera to actually do that. I needed to be a little bit closer to the body to try and work that out. But yeah, a very handy tip is to use those zip ties or very strong elastic bands. Elastic bands are probably not the best because they have that flexibility in them. But it's handy as an initial stage to hold everything together, whilst you then back that up with a zip tie, which will compress everything together without any elasticity and allow everything to set without you having to hold it for however long it takes. Now, JB Weld does actually cure very quick, but if you're using the slower stuff or anything else that takes longer to cure, that is always handy. But I always like to leave it to set anyway for sort of a good 30 minutes, just for that peace of mind. So we're just going to mix the JB Weld together now. I always have a habit of either mixing too much or too little, and never the right amount, no matter how many times I put these things together. But an equal amount of black and white, which is the adhesive and the hardener, and then just give that a little stir with the cotton bud, or the cotton bud. What else do people call them? Q-tips. Q-tips is the other word I'm thinking of. So once we've got a nice little grey mix, we're ready to go. So we're going to take 1/2. Now I always apply this to both receiving sides of the joining surfaces. But the first thing I'm going to do is apply a little bit of that and stuff the pin into that receiving hole. Give that a little wiggle around just to make sure that there's enough in there to hold it. And then we'll apply this to the receiving side. Now you don't want to put too much on because it will seep out as you compress the 2 components together, and it can be a little bit messy, but it is easy to tidy up and remove with a scalpel blade or with a tissue or with another clean cotton bud or Q-tip. As I said, we put it on both sides, so we just make sure we've got the right piece here. Dab some into the receiving pinhole, and then just slime some of that up there, and it's very, very good. Nice and easy. And as you can see, the Q-tip is nice and easy. Although the cotton does begin to deteriorate a little bit, it doesn't ever seem to come off for me, so it doesn't leave any of that cotton residue all over the model. So we're just going to make sure I've got all the surfaces covered, and as I remembered, I haven't got that bottom side done there, so I'm just going to do some of that on here as well. So just a little bit down the bottom here. So just before I compress everything together, I'll make sure all the mating surfaces are covered with this stuff for that strength. And again, on both sides, so we just run that down there. So we've got some on both halves of the receiving part of the Warhound torso. Now we squeeze that together, and we'll make sure that it lines up as best as we possibly can. There is that little bit of wiggle room from the pin, but once the pieces are in the right place, give it a firm grip and a firm squeeze. And we can see there that the sides have already begun to nicely bond together. And while we're holding that in one hand, we can then prep up the other side. So I'm going to do both halves of this in one go. You may actually want to just do one half at a time and just let that cure. But I've been doing this for a while now, so I can do both at the same time. But you know what, if this is your first Warhound, I might recommend that you just do one side first, let that fully dry. Just allows you to avoid making any mistakes yourself. Again, getting some of this weld on for that other pin. Stick that in there, we're all good. You can see those pins are about 1 inch long, so there's ½ an inch protruding. You can make them longer, but for the purposes of this, combined with JB Weld, I see no reason to have anything a bit bigger for this particular build. So we'll just do the other half of this engine intake or exhaust system, power generator, reactor piece. The largest pieces of resin on the model itself. They are pretty heavy. And just make sure once again we get that little bottom line done as well that I missed on the first one, that I then discovered before we actually put it together. But this time, obviously, I'm capturing that this time. So there we go. Exactly the same as before then. Get all this lined up, give it a good squeeze, make sure everything is in the right place, especially that bottom section as well, making sure that is fully aligned with the bottom of the model, so that it actually has a flat surface as best possible. But again, you can always sand it down, file it down, make sure that it's nice and smooth, and again, pack with green stuff. So once I'm happy that that's all in the right place, I'm just going to use an elastic band just temporarily, one-handed while trying to film. Is not the easiest thing to do. You might want to have a helper while you do this, but unfortunately my other half, Mrs. OABG, was not available at the time. We're only using this temporarily because, again, with elastic bands, they are elastic, hence the name, and that doesn't give you that compression that you need in order to push this together so everything sets in the right place. But whilst that is being held, we can then get the zip ties ready and wrap them round exactly like this. So you can see I've got two that go widthways. I've actually got one going over the top because I found that on my one, it may not happen to everyone because the way that the production process happens, that left hand side was beginning to lift a little bit on the bottom. So all I did was use that extra zip tie to hold that down so that we had two directions of force being applied. So it's about half an hour later now, so I've removed the elastic band and the zip ties from that rear section, and we're going to work on attaching that front section. The front section is a little bit snug, just because we've put the other pieces together now, and it is a little bit tight, but you know, that's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It just means that it's a nice snug fit, which should mean that there's less filling to worry about a bit later on. So we're just test fitting again, make sure everything is as good as it can be. And as you can see there, the pins are in, and that's just test held there now. And you can see there are some gaps underneath there, but I don't think there's anything you can do to avoid those, to be honest. So we'll be filling those with a bit of green stuff a little bit later on. But before we actually do any adhesive, I'm just going to test fit all the other pieces to make sure everything is still all hunky-dory now that everything has been well, the rear section has been glued down. We can just see there, look, everything looks all good. So I'm happy with that so far. So we can go ahead and then we can do the adhesive for the front section of the Warhound next, and just get that glued to that rear section. So now we're ready to attach that front section. I'm just going to mix up the JB Weld once again. So another blob of this, because the other stuff by now has well and truly gone off. If you're using the longer set time, that might still be useful if you've mixed a bit too much. But as I said before, I tend to mix either too much or too little. So a lot of it does go to waste because I'm useless with measurements. You should see me trying to bake a cake, it never works. We don't need quite as much as before because the surfaces are a little bit less that we're working with here, so I'm going to go slightly less than before and hope that I've made enough. So again, even parts of white and black, mix that together so we get a nice grey composite, and then we can apply that to the curved surfaces at the bottom and then where those pin joints are as well. So we need to remember to add the JB Weld to the pin locations, and then we can push these two surfaces together. Now, if you are not 100% confident about being able to paint most of the detail in through the top canopy here, this is the point where you might stop and paint the two separately, so that you can have the front half and the rear half and then do this afterwards. For me though, I'm going to build this in one go, but as I said, without the we're not going to add the top canopy, we're not going to add the little lift section. I should be able to paint enough detail in here on those control surfaces and stuff so it still looks pretty cool. It won't be as accurate perhaps as if you were painting it separately, but for me, I tend to find that, you know, everyone has a quick look inside and says, oh yeah, that's nice, you painted the inside. On the whole, they're actually looking at the entire Titan rather than the innards, so it doesn't tend to get that much attention. So it's a personal touch to be able to paint the inside and say, yeah, I've painted the inside, isn't that cool? Alternatively, you could just not paint it at all and glue that top section off and no one will be any the wiser, until they ask you, did you paint the insides? But as this is one of only a few Titans that actually has any interior detail, I'm going to paint it because I can. But again, entirely optional. You either do it, you either paint it now, you paint it the way I'm going to do it, where I'm going to put the two halves together, or you just don't paint it at all. So, you know, I don't paint the inside of Rhinos and Land Raiders, for example, but I will be painting the inside of this. So I think that's enough on that side. We're going to go to the other half now, just scoop up what I've got left. I am running a bit low here. I didn't get the mix quite right, but we'll see what we can do. So again, just cover the receiving surfaces, exactly the same as before. Now, if you found that you did have quite large gaps when you built this, just because of the way that the two halves have gone together, you can apply a little bit more of this stuff so that it does squeeze and fill those gaps for you. It's a handy little trick if you really want to try and pack out some of the join, especially if the surfaces don't mate particularly well. That's one of the things you can find when you do that test fit, is to see whether the gaps are naturally there or not. And if they are, as I said, you can just pack this out with a bit more of this stuff, or you can just fill it afterwards. The choice is entirely up to you. So just scrape the last of this out. As you can see, I think I just about got this right this time, which makes a change. So let's get the two halves put together then. And remember, this was a little bit of a snug fit, so it will take a little bit of jostling to get into place. And then a little squeeze, and there we go. That's just going to pop in. Go on, go on, go on. There we go. And you can see there's a little bit that's just oozed out by that power conduit on the right hand side. You can see a little bit getting onto your fingers. I do recommend that you wipe that off as quickly as possible, because as soon as you put it onto your clothes, you will ruin your clothes. So have a handy little tissue available just to wipe some of that excess away, because if you do get it onto your fingers and then start wiping it around your jeans or whatever, yeah, you'll make a mess. So just try and wipe some of that away. But then when it's hardened, you can actually scrape some of it away and sand it as well. You can actually, you know, sand, drill and scrape any of this stuff off afterwards once it's fully set. But what we're going to do is get some zip ties again, and we're going to tie these around that front and rear section, just to allow this to cure and to set under compression. And once they're fully tight and that's not going anywhere, and we can just go and leave that, we can work on something else or go and have a cup of tea, whichever your preference is, whilst that cures. And as I said, this stuff dries 5 to 6 minutes, to be honest, but I'm going to leave this a good half an hour. Before you do abandon it though, do make sure that everything is lined up as it can be, so you've got that working time to move anything around that you need to move around. But if you've pre-measured and you've dry fitted and test fitted, then you shouldn't have too much to worry about. But it's always nice just to check before you abandon it and leave it to cure, because then it's going to be stuck for a while. So 1 tea consumed, and I am back just to check where we're going. And we're just leaving that on there for now, and we're going to stick on these rear exhaust plates. Now, as I said at the start of the video, I'm going to be using super glue for these sections. It's just a little bit easier than using Weld because of the thin surface area. We'll just line those up, and we can do that whilst, you can even do this while the other bit's drying, to be honest. But just give those a good squeeze, let the glue begin to bind, and then we're good to go. Again, you should always key the surfaces on this. The surfaces are pretty thin, so you could get away with just a bit of rough sandpaper. So what we can now do is remove that zip tie, but we can also fill in all of the gaps we've got. So I'm just pointing out some of the obvious gaps that we've got in the kit. And I've got my big roll of green stuff from Green Stuff World, mainly because you get 6 times as much for the price as Games Workshop's. So I think that's a strip of 36 inches. But we're just going to take some of that, and as with any green stuff application, mix the two bits together and then just stuff it into the creases using a sculpting tool. And then once that's begun to cure, you can cut away, sand and file, and get rid of everything that is sticking out that you don't need to be sticking out, and make it as smooth as possible so it's invisible to the paint job. Now, there is this door section that does go in the middle of the kit here, but you know, if you're painting this like I am after these two halves are put together, there's no chance that I'm going to be getting to paint any of this detail if I put this door in. But I do want to test fit it to make sure that it's a snug fit, and we'll go in after all the painting's been done, but you may need to sand or file this down to make sure that it goes into the right place. Although I have seen a few builds where people have just ignored this piece entirely just because it's a little bit of a pain, but you know what, it's added detail, it looks cool. So I'm going to be putting it in, but again I'm going to be painting that entirely separately. But where I've cleaned that up already, that is a perfect fit, so I haven't got to worry about anything else with that. So I'll pop that out, and then we can paint everything first, and then we can assemble that as part of the final build. See, look at that little painting demonstration as well. If you've got that door in the way, you won't be able to paint the rear detail. Now with the weapon arms, this is going to be the same again. I'm just going to make sure they're a snug fit without having any filling going on, which they appear to be. But just for ease, I am actually going to paint these separately as well because of the little servitors in there with all the screens and panelling that they've got. So I am going to paint those. This one's a bit snugger on that side than the other one. But I am going to be painting those separately as well. So always sub-assemblies for anything like this is key if you really want to do as good a paint job as you possibly can. So that does actually fit in there. It's a little bit tight, needs a little bit of persuasion to get in there, but I am going to be painting that separately. Now there are a couple of other pieces that we can glue on at this stage. That is the void shield generators. There's two of those little that sit on the top. So you can see there I've got those. They just pop in there. Again, just test fit to make sure they lie smooth and snug. And then we'll score those first as usual, and then we'll use the Gorilla super glue gel and get those stuck in. There's also the small rear exhaust sections as well. There's sort of 4 or 5 exhausts that go down the back centre just to hide some of that, you know, plain boring resin. It's like an added bit of detail. So we're going to do that first, and then that's going to be pretty much the assembly complete at this stage for the torso. So a little bit of the super glue in there. We'll put those in here, and that's them. Give them a little wiggle just to make sure the super glue reaches both sides. That felt a little bit loose, which is why I took that one off, just making sure that both sides had got some glue transferred across, which they had, but it's just me being impatient. This is the little last bit that we're going to put on in this build video, and that's this small set of exhausts here. Once again, I'm going to key all of the surfaces here for the super glue to adhere to. Again, you could use Weld on this, but I'm just going to use super glue. It's non-load bearing, it's just a bit of added detail. So I've keyed the other surface as well. I'm just going to stick that into there. Just make sure that it is central. I think that actually fits perfectly central anyway. I think there might be a sort of a millimetre gap either side, but either way, just stick that in, and that is that done. Now there are some other detail pieces that go into this kit, and that is the naming plate and some other little bit of interior detail that actually fits above the winch section within the main canopy area at the front there. Now once again, I'm going to be painting those separately because it's quite fiddly to paint inside here. So we'll just show you those little pieces now. Just want to make sure that they actually fit in. So here's the two pieces. There's an Imperial Eagle and a small Mechanicum prayer box. What do they call it? Where they go and worship the Omnissiah. One of those kind of things. So they fit in that little panel there and on the other side. And they fit just above where those winch controls went. But as you can see, this is quite fiddly to get in at this stage. And if you were to put those in, I think even that's beyond me to try and be able to paint those with any sense. You can see that's quite tricky. That keeps popping out. But actually, it didn't quite fit. It did need a little bit of trimming down. But we'll do that now so that we know that when it comes to sticking this in after everything's been painted, that it would just pop in quite nicely. So what I'll do is I'll just go away and trim that off. But you get the idea. I'm just going to gently scrape away either side. Just to remove it by sort of 0.5 millimetre or so. It's all it's required. Do that on both sides, and then that will eventually fit in. But that is as far as I'm going to take the torso build in this video. Just purely because I need to be able to paint it somehow quite sensibly. And that's definitely my advice, is when you're doing sub-assemblies like this, is to always think about the paint job that you need to achieve afterwards. If you're not going to be doing all of the detail inside, then you can leave these bits out, you can leave the door out, you can anything on the inside, you don't even need to stick in, because you're going to cover it up with the top canopy section. But if you are going to paint that interior detail, always think about how you're going to be actually able to do that with a standard paintbrush. A lot of people actually go with just kind of a glow effect, and they spray it, you know, overspray it slightly with a little bit of green, and just almost look as if everything's been illuminated by a green light. You could do that, or you can paint it with a bit more detail. Entirely up to you. But as I said, this is as far as we're going to take the build video for the torso. So there we go then, guys. That is the Warhound torso built. Again, as far as I can possibly take it, to make sure that putting it together doesn't prevent any of the main paint job that I want to achieve on the kit. But I hope you enjoyed the video, hope you learned something new, and if you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.